Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. In this episode I talked to Jason Maassen from the eScience Center in the Netherlands and then to Christian Meessen from the Helmholtz Association in Germany. The subject of our conversation is the Research Software Directory. But to me this is also a story about how two centers can work effectively together rather than going alone and reinventing the wheel. First we hear from Jason, who explains to us how the Research Software Directory at the eScience Center came about and the motivations behind it. You may remember that in a previous episode I talked to Marouane Groenpeter and Benoit Chauvet about their work on software heritage. With software heritage, the emphasis is on archiving and preserving software, recognizing it as an important cultural artifact. Research software directories, on the other hand, provide lists of software and software libraries rather than archiving the code itself. But let me hand over to Jason now, who can explain this far better and in more detail. Hello, Jason, from the eScience Center in the Netherlands. It's in Amsterdam, isn't it?
Yes, it's called the Netherlands eScience Center, so that's our official title. And indeed, we're located in Amsterdam, and we've been around for 11 years now. And our main purpose is to support researchers in developing and applying research software. So we're sort of the national center for research software development. I think that's the best way to describe it.
So it's like a national resource for software engineering or technology. Is that how it works?
Yes, so we have a large group of research software engineers working for us. I think at the moment we have about 65 of them. And researchers can apply for research projects where research software plays an essential role. And then these projects go through the traditional reviewing circus. And the ones that are accepted actually get support from us in kind. So they get a number of research software engineer hours for each of the projects. And the sizes of these projects can vary from a couple of months to a couple of years. And then our main role in these projects is actually helping the researchers develop or modify or apply the research software that they need to actually get their research results, so answer the research questions, basically.
Excellent. And what is your role in the eScience Center?
I'm one of the technology leads, so my main role is to safeguard the quality of the research software that's coming out of the projects. Of course, these are research projects, so the quality varies a lot. It can be simple prototypes to evaluate whether or not a certain approach works. But sometimes also we have software that's actually used a lot throughout different projects over and over again. And then it's important to have the quality right to ensure that the software is actually maintainable in the long run, that you can actually trust the outcome, etc., etc. So as a technology lead, I'm sort of involved in the projects, not directly doing the project, but sort of discussing with the research software engineers what kind of research software comes out, whether this is interesting to actually reuse in other projects, how they can improve on the quality or try to build a community around it, etc., etc. And of course, as part of this, we also want to show the impact that our research software has on research in general. And that's one of the reasons we actually built the Research Software Directory a couple of years ago.
Research Software Directory. So what exactly is that and what is it that you've built?
So the Research Software Directory is essentially an online platform. It's open source. People can use it. They can register their software there, but they can also download it and install it themselves. And the main goal of the Research Software Directory is to show the impact of research software. As a center, our main goal is to actually develop research software. But over the years, we've actually had a lot of trouble of showing the impact that we've had on science, or on research, I should say. Because traditionally, research is really about counting papers, publications, citations, those kind of things. And although research software is one of the most important tools nowadays to get your research results, it wasn't seen as sort of a first-class citizen, right? It was like a tool that you used and that was it. Of course, we don't agree with this. We think that research software is important and it should be sort of a prime research output in its own right. And because we had problems actually showing this to the world, we decided at some point, 2018, that we needed a shop window essentially for the research software that we created. And that became the Research Software Directory. So it's really meant to show the impact that research software has on research. It's also meant to make research software more findable for researchers. We try to encourage the citation of research software, right? Because it's often not cited in publications, even though it's used in many publications. And of course, we also want to share all of the data that we collect because we are big supporters of open science. So all of the information we collect about the software is also shared with the rest of the world and other platforms of open science.
So how did it all start? So you mentioned 2018 when you came up with the Research Software Directory.
As a national center for research software, we frequently have evaluation rounds where we, as a center, have to prove that we actually are added value to research. Like I said before, this actually was difficult for us because we had problems with showing what the impact of our research software was. So at some point in, I think it was 2016 or 2018, we decided to do a small internal project called the Impact Project together with the CWI, which is the Center for Mathematics and Computer Science, which is actually our neighbor in Amsterdam. And we worked with a group there that was measuring all kinds of things about research software, about the quality and the impact, etc. And what we try to do is come up with a way to actually show the impact of our research software. And the conclusion of this project was basically we did not have enough data. We couldn't actually show the impact because there wasn't enough information to do so. That actually led to the development of the Research Software Directory. So we said, okay, we need to have a place where we can collect this information, store it, and then somehow analyze it to see what the impact of the research software is.
Can I just ask, what kind of information were you looking for specifically?
Well, we were looking for information that somehow links this research software to other research outputs, right? So if you look at publications or data sets, typically what happens is that people actually cite data sets in their papers or they cite other papers in their papers. So you have this entire graph of information that somehow shows the context in which a certain research output lives, which data was used to produce a paper or which paper method was used to actually produce the data, for example. And we wanted to have a similar information about the research software that we were producing. And of course, it wasn't available because people weren't actually citing research software at the time. The best you could have basically if somebody actually put a link to your GitHub in the acknowledgement somewhere, but usually it was sort of mentioned in a sentence and that was it. So we decided we needed some way to actually start collecting this information, at least about the software that we have available or that we were actually creating ourselves. And that became the Research Software Directory. So we started with this in 2018. We started using it ourselves, and quite quickly there was a lot of feedback from other organizations that were also interested in using it. Because at that time, other organizations, research organizations, were also starting to notice that, hey, software is actually important, research software, and we somehow need to link this to all of the other stuff that we're doing because we can also claim the credits for research software that we have developed and actually had a large impact on research. Of course, the initial prototype that we built was really sort of meant for the eScience Center itself. It wasn't really designed to be a platform that supports multiple organizations. It was simply our shop window, essentially. So it was quite hard for other organizations to also install it and maintain it, etc., etc. And that's why last year we actually decided to re-implement the Research Software Directory and turn it into a cloud service, right? So it's an online service that other organizations can also use. And in the current version, you can just go to the Research Software Directory, register your software, and make use of the platform without having to install it yourself.
You're providing a link to where the actual software is. You don't take that software and store it in your directory itself.
That's correct. So what we store is metadata about the software, links to related research outputs, things like publications, datasets, other software, etc. So we essentially collect all of the information around the software or links to the information, but we don't store the source code itself or an archived copy or the actual publications that mention the software. So essentially what we do is we collect the graph of information, but not the actual information.
Software evolves with time, and sometimes repositories themselves change. How do you maintain these links, or how do you maintain the entries? Is that something that you do, or is that the responsibility of the person or the organization that creates an entry in the Research Software Directory?
Both, actually. So what we try to do is we try to automate the harvesting of information as much as possible. But unfortunately, we cannot do it fully automatic yet. Things that we can harvest is information from a GitHub repo, for example. So if you provide the GitHub repo link or GitLab repo link in the RSD, we can use this to harvest information about development activity. Similarly, if you're archiving copies of the releases of your software in Zenodo, for example, you can register the concept DOI of this archived copy with the Research Software Directory, and then we can actually harvest automatically all of the information about new versions that are being released. So once you have this, you don't have to do this again and again for each new version. It's done automatically. And similarly, we're looking at the moment at harvesting information from package managers such as PyPy, for example, or NPM, to see if we can get more information there. The other research outputs, so things like data sets or papers, for example, is something that at the moment still needs to be added manually. So whenever somebody has a paper that uses the software in some way, you can add it to the RSD. We've automated this as much as we can, so you can just copy and paste a DOI, a digital object identifier, and all of the other information is then harvested automatically. But cutting and pasting this DOI is still something you need to do yourself at the moment. We're looking at trying to get this information automatically also, but it's complex at the moment. The situation of citing software is actually improving, but we're not there yet. So we cannot do it fully automatic yet.
That was exactly what I wanted to talk about next, the citation of software, because there have been various attempts to crack that. And I know that Stefan Druskat came up with this research citation format. Is that something that you take into account? Say somebody is having a citation file in the repository, they can then actually automatically use that as a citation or a way of citing the software.
Yes, we do. We do it indirectly. If you have a citation file in your repository, this information can be used to create the metadata that accompanies the archived copy of your software if you push it into Zenodo. And then we can get this metadata out of Zenodo again or out of DataCite and use that to generate citation information for your software on the research software directory. So we have this large button saying get citation information that allows visitors to select a certain version of the software and then click on this and get a file back in a BibTeX format or EndNote or RIS that actually contains all of the information that you need to cite it in your publications.
You mentioned Zenodo now a few times. So it is kind of relying on the information that is in Zenodo in terms of citation. Is that correct?
Yes, it's relying on information in sort of the open science ecosystem. So we can harvest information from Zenodo, but also from DataCite, from Crossref, and we have multiple sources that we try to get data from. The reason for doing this is that you don't want to put all of this information into the system manually. We treat the information coming from these systems as the ground truth, let's put it like that. As soon as we have a digital object identifier, then we can actually harvest all of the metadata that goes with that, which allows us to automate but also keep things up to date automatically.
The next question is, of course, how do people get on board? Is it for the Netherlands exclusively, or can anybody from around the globe sign up?
Anyone can sign up. So we have various people, research groups, and also organizations already using the research software directory, including people from all over Europe, but also from Canada, for example. It's certainly not meant for the Netherlands only. Essentially, anyone who's into research software and wants to share this with the world can sign up and use the research software directory. If you look at the system, it is sort of geared towards open source software because that really combines well with open science, of course.
Yeah.
So if you have open source software in GitHub or GitLab, that's sort of the most powerful combination because then we can automatically harvest all kinds of data coming from the different systems. We do have some software which isn't open source, but then the functionality of the platform is a bit more limited because we cannot get everything automatically.
When people are interested in signing up or adding software to the software directory, what is it that they need to do?
If you go to the research software directory, there is a link that says sign up to contribute. If you click on this link, then we'll ask you for a little bit of information. One of the things that you need is you probably need, if you're especially internationally, you need an ORCID. So an ORCID identifier, which is a identifier used to identify researchers essentially. And if you have an ORCID, then we can use that to actually give you access to the system and use that as access control. Specifically for the Netherlands, we have a different system called SurfConnect, which is a authentication system used by all Dutch research institutes. And that allows us to connect entire organizations in one go, and then people can use their own credentials to sign in. But at the moment, this only works for the Netherlands. So ORCID is a way to go because it allows us to add people from all over the world.
The next question that I have, I know that somebody in Potsdam in Germany, for instance, is using your system, but they don't submit their software to the research software directory that you provide. They basically install their own service.
Yes.
So this is another option for organizations to, rather than reinvent the wheel and say, we're going to build a wonderful research software directory from scratch, they can actually take your code and install it locally.
That is also an option. So the research software directory itself is also an open source software. Organizations are also, if they want to, they can also install their own copy of the research software directory. At the moment, the Helmholtz Association is already doing this, and we're working with them closely in developing the research software directory. If you're interested in this, it should be quite easy to set up. I won't guarantee that development documentation is entirely complete, so it's probably best at the moment to just contact us and ask how to do this. But it should be quite easy to set this up, install and host your own. One small word of warning is that, of course, if you do this, then you also need to maintain this version yourself, in the sense that you need to update whenever new versions are released by us. And you also, of course, need to manage all the data which is inside of the system itself, create backups, etc., etc. It does require a bit more work than just using the line version that we are offering, but it is certainly a possibility. And if you have a larger organization like Helmholtz, for example, then it makes sense to do this.
And finally, the last question is, what's in store for the future? What are your plans?
Well, for the coming year, we're looking at extending the set of features of the Research Software Directory to better connect to the open science ecosystem that's out there. So we're working on improving the backend APIs to actually allow us to exchange information with other services more easily. We're also looking at improving the user experience a bit more. So at the moment, we have a lot of software in the Research Software Directory already, and it becomes difficult to actually find things because the amount of data is growing. So we want to improve the search and the way in which we show the software to the user. In addition to this, we're looking at the long term of the Research Software Directory. So this is being developed at the moment by the Netherlands eScience Center and the Helmholtz Association. But there are a lot of other organizations interested either in using it or hosting their own or actually contributing to the code, which is also an option. And we need to figure out, okay, what is the best way to do this and to really grow the community around the Research Software Directory in such a way that we can tailor to the needs of all these different organizations and also give them a voice in the direction that development is going in.
As Jason mentioned, the team at the eScience Center is hoping to spread the use of the Research Software Directory further, and I remember that earlier in 2023, the team did a roadshow of the tool in a set of presentations to participants around the globe. Research Software Directories, as Jason already said, are an important resource to show the impact software has on the world of research. But there is also another important use case for research software directories, and this is to avoid recreating applications and code that already exists, which is an aspect that Christian Meessen from the Helmholtz Association in Potsdam near Berlin highlights. As Jason mentioned, the Helmholtz Association has teamed up with the eScience Center to port the Research Software Directory to Helmholtz. In contrast to the eScience Center, the Helmholtz implementation is only available to the association members and associates, and therefore it serves a slightly different purpose, as Christian explains in the following interview. Hello, Christian. Very nice to meet you today. Before we start talking about research software directories at Helmholtz, maybe you can quickly introduce yourself.
My name is Christian Maassen, and I am by trade a geoscientist. In fact, I made my PhD in 3D modeling, and I started programming for this PhD thesis quite a bit. And then I realized that actually programming is something really nice to do in science, which is why I switched to the eScience Center at GFZ here in Potsdam. And I've been employed at the eScience Center for a little bit more than 3 years now. I am the product owner, I'd say, of the Research Software Directory for Helmholtz.
So could you start giving us an overview of what the Research Software Directory at Helmholtz is and what it does?
So the software directory wants to provide an academic environment for researchers and research software engineers to find and promote research software. We wanted to do this as a central instance for Helmholtz so that all the Helmholtz institutions have a common place to showcase their research software.
And since when is that Research Software Directory in place?
So we started contributing to the development in the beginning of 2022, and the first prototype was online in July 2022.
It's fairly recent then.
It's really recent, and we just opened the software directory for all associates in March this year. Before that, we only had a couple of test users.
So how many users do you actually have, and how many repositories are there?
At the moment, we have about 90 users, and we have about 55 public software entries.
What was the main motivation for you to come up with a research software directory? We have GitHub nowadays, or mostly. Why a directory in the first place?
As you said, software lies on GitHub or GitLab, and there are several other repository types where software can be stored. So if a researcher would like to find a specific software in their field, they would have to have a look in the papers, of course, but maybe software is not properly cited there, and maybe the authors are not easy to find anymore because they left the institution or they stopped being researchers. They really want to provide a place for software engineers to promote their software and for researchers to find it in this academic environment. Another thing that we think the research software directory could solve is that centers need to keep track about the software that is being developed in the centers. So at the moment, there is plenty of output, but it's not really tracked properly. The peer-reviewed publications in journals, they are being tracked pretty good. But for software, that's different. And there is a task group in Helmholtz at the moment who is developing software metrics and indicators. And we think that a software directory would be able to help obtaining these metrics.
Because we do track papers in research institutions because we want to see how impactful a particular scientific research is. Is that the purpose, what you're saying with tracking software as well? We want to see how impactful the software is.
This is really an ongoing discussion in our center and in Helmholtz overall, where it's not really sure how should we measure impact, but we could at least try to find some measures how we know that we should count a software. So for papers, that's pretty easy because as soon as it's peer-reviewed, Helmholtz usually counts this paper. But for software is usually not peer-reviewed. It's more like an addendum to a paper. So finding some metrics that would tell you, can we count this software output for a center or not? That would be something that we think could the RSD be helpful for.
Just to be clear, it's actually software developed exclusively by Helmholtz. It's not just research software generally.
That's right, yeah. For the Helmholtz software directory, we only publish software that is developed within Helmholtz or by Helmholtz Associates. So.
I think the research software directory, you worked very closely with the Netherlands eScience Center on this one, didn't you?
This is correct, yeah.
Could you explain that collaboration with the eScience Center in more detail?
The research software directory is not our development. We are just co-developers, so the actual research software directory is maintained and was funded by the Netherlands eScience Center. They actually had a version of the research software directory before the current one, which was the base of the decision for us to use the research software directory. I think we contacted them around the end of the year 2021, whether they would be interested in a cooperation, and this is how it started.
So how does this collaboration work? It's, I guess, ongoing, isn't it?
We work really closely together. So we are usually, I basically see them on a daily basis almost.
All right.
So we are in their stand-ups, if need be, discussing features and wishes or feedback. We are also participating in their weekly meetings where we discuss the broader vision, how to proceed with the software directory. Usually it works like if we have a feature that we would like to implement, we generally try to implement it in their code base. So we do have a fork of the software directory where we have basically the corporate design of Helmholtz and the front page. And most of the other things go into the upstream repository, the research software directory of the Netherlands eScience Center. We try to find ways that features that we wish to be in the research software directory that both sides benefit from it. And this is actually working quite well. I cannot remember a feature that was not beneficial to both sides at the moment.
So it's quite a close collaboration between you and the eScience Center in the Netherlands. I mean, if you're working on a daily basis with each other, that's probably as close as it gets. How do you see the software directory then going forward in future? Is there going to be a point where you say, okay, well, we're going to part ways with the eScience Center, or do you see that continue?
The way I see is that we will continue like this for quite a while, because The research software directory by the eScience Center is really one of the most advanced software directories, I would say, in terms of usability, because it's very attractive to use and very nice to look at. We think that it really has the potential to be a long-lasting product. So in the future, we see the software directory not only as a software directory where you store the metadata, but we want to provide an additional use benefit for the software engineers mostly, so that it doesn't become just another software piece where you have to enter your code or you enter your metadata, but we want to bring forward the software development and research as well. Many researchers, when they start developing software, they do it for the first time. So they usually don't have, or many of them don't have informatics or something like that in university. So they start learning it bit by bit. And we kind of want to provide additional help here. So for example, showing them, hey, your code has Python. Why don't you use this linter or something like that? So that's a very specific example right now. But we want to somehow have a tool that is useful for the software engineer, so they want to use it and they see that there is a benefit.
If the repository that is registered with the research software directory, scan it maybe, and then find out if there's something missing or come up with suggestions of what they might want to add in future. Is that what you...
Exactly. So one of the bigger topics we are going to tackle this year, hopefully, is a license consultation within Helmholtz. So licenses are something that is quite crucial for software, and it's quite of a hassle as well for the software engineers. But if you want to publish your code, it should have a proper license attached to it. So, and that should be compatible with the dependencies. Yeah, for example, this would be a use case that would be very helpful, I think, for software engineers, that you can contact someone, hey, here, this is my repository, it's in the software directory, the metadata is already scraped, can you help me finding a proper license?
Let's go back to the adoption of the eScience and research software directory. And how easy was it actually to adopt? I mean, how much effort was involved?
There was actually quite a bit of effort involved from both sides. I need to make a bit of a detour now. So the first software directory, it was one that they thought they would just provide as a self-service for everyone. So they put it open source, and they were hoping that people would pick it up and start hosting the software themselves, but somehow it didn't. So they started to think about providing it as a service, which is why the second version, the one that is live now, is called Research Software Directory as a Service. So at this point, then Helmholtz came and we said, hey, we want to host it ourselves. But it was not designed to be that way anymore. We had to find a way to somehow find a way to create themes, which was not implemented at the time. And yeah, we sat together it took quite a while, a couple of weeks, until we figured out a way to have a theming. And that was, I think, one of the biggest tasks at the beginning.
It's almost like they went back to the first version then. So because the first version was something that anybody could adopt, but then they went for something like a service, and then you said, well, we want to do that, but we would like to put our own branding on it. Was that the job you're talking about?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. There was specifically the front page. We wanted to have a different front page than the one of the eScience Center. Yeah, this was something that was not thought about in the beginning, how this could be implemented. And we do have a way now, but I think we will reconsider how it is implemented and start a new way.
Now that you have the research software directory, how do you make people actually use it? So how do you convince people to register the software there?
So at the moment, we didn't do very much PR yet. So we had a news post on the hyphus.net webpage. And at the moment, it's mouth-to-mouth propaganda. At least that's a German term. I don't know whether you say that in English as well.
It works.
So this year, the Helmholtz Incubator platforms would like to award for the first time the Helmholtz Incubator Software Award. And one of the prerequisites of the software award is that the software should be in the directory. This award will be awarded in 3 categories, and the prize will go directly to the developers. So not the centers, but the developers themselves, they will be rewarded. So this will be one way where we can promote it, and we are going to present it in various Helmholtz formats.
The aim being that ultimately, if you want to publish software in Helmholtz, you have to do that, basically.
Personally, I think making it mandatory would not be the right way to go. You should not enforce programmers to do something just because you want it. They should come to us because they want to. So this is why we want to provide additional services like this license consultation and things like that. But ultimately, this is not our decision. This really depends on what the research centers want. And if they want to track their software output with a software directory, this might be happening.
Listeners of the German version of the podcast may remember the episode on the Helmholtz Award for Software Christian was just talking about. I like the idea to reward software developers not only for creating useful software tools, but also to share it with others in form of, for instance, research software directories. Helmholtz is not the only institute or research center that adopts or wants to adopt the research software directory platform provided by the eScience Center. And if you are interested in the work, you can look up the links from the episode notes. And finally, I'm going to return to the subject of research software directories in a follow-up episode a little bit later this season with an interview with Neil Chuhong from the Software Sustainability Institute and Alice Allen from the Astrophysics Source Code Library based in the US, so stay tuned. Oh, time's up. See you next time. But before I forget, this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons license. See ya.